the second talk right on time. And our second speaker from the University of Nottingham is Stratia Paputselu. She's a PhD student working under the supervision of Douglas Artley, and she will be presenting us FNIR's study on language processing across childhood and adolescence. Thank you, Stratia.
Hi, thank you, Val. Can you guys see my PowerPoint? Yeah, you can, okay, great. Okay, so yeah, hi everyone, I'm Thea. Thank you so much for tuning in. I know there's a lot of talks happening at the same time, so I appreciate that. And as Val mentioned, I'm a third-year PhD student at the University of Nottingham, and mainly my research aims at identifying neural markers of language processing across childhood and development and adolescence in a disorder called developmental language disorder using functional near-infrared spectroscopy. And today I'm going to talk to you about the first part of this research, looking at typical language development using the same technique. So to put in context, before we go on, I'll give you a little bit of background on developmental language disorder. So DLD is a lifelong condition that affects about 7% of the population. And at least for now, we don't know exactly the biological causes behind it. People with DLD present a constellation of deficiencies, both in language production as well as comprehension, and they have very variable phenotypes. So clinically, it's really hard to identify them, especially given that right now we don't have an objective diagnostic tool. So what I aim to do with my project is to use neuroimaging to describe the cortical patterns of activation in these children, and ultimately develop a diagnostic tool by identifying distinctive neural markers in their brain activity when they're processing language. So to do that, the first thing we need to do is find out what typical language development looks, so we have something to compare it against. So what we know and what we don't know about typical language development. We know already that the language network develops both functionally and structurally throughout our lives. Left language lateralization is actually established very early on. Some studies have found it present at birth, or it emerges shortly after. And then during adolescence and childhood, we develop more focused activations within the left hemisphere, so between left frontal and temporal regions, and the number of connectivity between the hemispheres, so between left and right, decreases. And then in adulthood, we observe a shift in activation from frontal to posterior regions within the left hemisphere. And that probably is because as we become more proficient language users, we use more lower level processing regions, which are located in temporal areas, and we reserve frontal regions for more complex tasks. So let's say if you're learning a second language, you would be engaging more brain areas because you need more effort. And what we don't know, however, is when that shift actually happens. And that would be very important if we were trying to determine if somebody has typical language development for their age. So that's what we set to find out. And we hypothesized that if this shift in neural activity has not already happened by the time children reach adolescence, we would observe activity both in frontal as well as temporal brain regions. So how did we do that? We used a neuroimaging technique called functional near-infrared spectroscopy, or FNES. And FNES relies on the same principles as fMRI, but instead it uses light refraction to measure changes in concentration of oxygenated and deoxygenated hemoglobin in the blood. It has been reliably used in the past in loads of language and auditory studies, and also it's been proven quite useful with pediatric populations. Other advantages include that it's acoustically quiet, it's non-invasive, so as you can see in the picture, it's literally just a cup that sits on the brain, and it's robust to movement artifacts, allowing for overt language production. However, on the flip side, it has quite a poor spatial resolution, the order of about 1 centimeter, and poor depth sensitivity, which is about 1.5 centimeter. Depth sensitivity is not really an issue with our study because fortunately the language networks are located on the outer layers of the cortex, so we were still able to access them with FNAIRS. So what we did, we recruit 18 adolescents between the ages of 11 and 16 and 12 children between the ages of 6 and 10. And we screen them to make sure that their hearing and their linguistic and cognitive development were within a normal range. Then we asked them to complete a series of language and control tasks while we were measuring their brain activity with FNAIRS. Language tasks were things like repeating, listening and repeating sentences, or listening a sentence and having to decide whether it's grammatically correct or not. And the control task was mainly them hearing the same sentence again, but this time reversed. So it sounded like language, but did not make any sense. And we measured activity bilaterally from frontal and temporal regions, both during language processing as well as rest. So we did collect some data on resting state functional connectivity, but we haven't had time to analyze those yet. So I'm not going to be talking about them later on. Oh, and our predefined regions of interest are here. You can see them here circled in black. So we had 4 of them, 2 on the left and 2 on the right. So what did we find? So here is the block average hemoglobin time courses derived from our regions of interest at group level. So it's both adolescents and children grouped together. And as you can see on the top panels here, focusing on the red line that represents oxygenated hemoglobin, we had higher activations in temporal regions compared to frontal, whereas if you remember earlier, language is strongly lateralized to the left. So we sort of thought that we would see higher activations on the left hemisphere. So the 2 left panels, as I see them, yeah, you would see them the same way, yeah. So we were a bit surprised by that. And we think that that's mainly because all of our stimuli were auditory. So they preferentially activated auditory processing regions, which are in the temporal lobes. Also, as I said earlier, we tend to be using a lot of our frontal regions when tasks are more challenging. And we think that even for our younger children, the tasks weren't that difficult. So maybe that's why we don't see a spike on the left frontal area. But what was most important for us was to actually see whether there were any group differences. So we did a mixed ANOVA, and we found that there was a statistically significant interaction between hemisphere region, that being temporal or frontal, as well as age group. And when we did the further analysis with the simple effects, we saw that the only difference existing was that adolescents had higher activity in left temporal compared to left frontal regions. And you can see these are these green bars over here. And we found no other differences. There were no differences in the children's group. And what does that tell us? So first of all, we were happy to say that FNAIRS was actually an appropriate tool to track down these maturational changes, because they've used it before with children, but never comparing 2 age groups that were so close to one another. So we were happy to at least have a difference there. And adolescents, as we thought they would, they had more adult-like brain patterns, showing higher activity in left temporal areas, perhaps reflecting the automation skills that is not yet present in younger children. But about that last thing, for us to be able to say that 100%, we needed to find a significant interaction between age group and region within the left hemisphere, rather than having both hemispheres there. So we think that's because of our very small sample size. So the children's group was only 12 of them. And yeah, I would strongly recommend in the future, if we could do this again with larger sample sizes, and if it could be longitudinal as well, that would be even better. So following the same children across time. So where does this take us next? Because we're trying to say whether we can apply this to DLD. So we know already that some children with DLD have atypically responses when processing language in frontal and temporal regions. So we want to better characterize those using FNAIRS, and ultimately we hope to be able to identify differences in different developmental stages in DLD, and also differences between children with DLD and typically developed children. And if we achieve that, maybe we can develop an objective diagnostic tool for the accurate and early identification of DLD that would give the access to more timely interventions. A lot of behavioral studies have shown that the earlier you can access therapy, the better your future outcomes can be, because obviously language is one of those things that has a critical period of development. So you want to catch it as early as possible. So yeah, that's all from me. Thank you so much for listening. Here's my team back in Oingham. And if you want to find more information about DLD, the Ragel organization is a non-profit that tries to raise awareness, and their website is a great source of information.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. We already have some questions coming in, and people should keep writing and upvoting the questions they're most interested in. And I'm going to start reading them. So Aparna is asking whether you could elaborate on your screening method.
Sure. So first of all, we wanted to make sure they have normal hearing, because obviously we would play to them a lot of auditory stimuli. So we tested, it's standard in the UK, you do sort of a run through frequencies, and you ask the children to press a button if they can hear it. So we made sure that everybody could hear above 25 dB, and then we assumed they had normal hearing. And then the language and behavioral assessments was a battery of standardized ones that have cut points defining whether you're normal or not. So we used, I don't know if they are international, we used one called WASI, it's the Wessler Scale of Intelligence, which is adapted for children. And it has things like matrices. It's like puzzles that you need to find which piece is missing.
Right.
Building patterns from blocks. So you give them 9 blocks, show them a pattern, and ask them to arrange the blocks so they fit the pattern. And then language ones, we did the TROC, which assesses grammar. We did the NEPSI, that assesses phonological awareness. And we did one more. We did vocabulary. So we asked them to give definitions to words. And all of them were within normal limits, but we also asked parents to do one called a checklist for communication for the parent, which is used a lot in autism as well. And the parents just judge how their child communicates.
Okay. Just quickly, Aparna has a follow-up. Did you try visual language processing also?
No, I don't. If with visual language processing, she means if we've had written words on the screen, we try to avoid that as much as possible, because we didn't want to add extra workload, especially for the younger ones that were 6. Maybe they weren't proficient readers yet, so we didn't want their performance to be affected by their speed of reading. And also we couldn't have an experiment that's like 3 hours long. So we tried
for children.
Because that was actually an issue. Like our paradigm was actually very long. It's about 2 hours, and a lot of kids were getting tired. So yeah.
So the next question is from Andres von Schlenden, and he's asking, even though your focus is on children, adolescents, do you know anything about the time course of the shift to posterior regions in adulthood? So is it a process that it finishes in adulthood, or it actually continues developing into older age?
So when they've done adult studies, at least the literature I'm aware of, they don't really do, they don't sort of track them. So you would get, when you say adults, it would be 18 to 50 years old, and you would just take them as one group without looking into finer differences. I know in older age that these networks tend to become less well connected. I don't know exactly what happens with this change, whether you start engaging your frontal regions more. I know they've done some very interesting studies with second languages, so with adults learning second languages, and then you see that the more proficient they become with a language, then you see this shift again. So I would answer that it is something that develops and changes because it depends literally on how much effort you put. If something is easy and automatic, you wouldn't need as much brain power, let's say.
Makes sense. We have time for one last question, and even this one asks you to speculate a bit. Joao Araujo is asking, what do you hypothesize would happen to the hemodynamic response function in parietal areas, let's say the left and the right IPG, that are usually implicated in integration processes for language tasks across development?
That's actually a very, very interesting question. The problem with that and with FNES is that, as I said, it has quite a poor spatial resolution. And some of these parietal areas would be too close to the temporal areas. So we wouldn't necessarily know whether the activation we're saying is due to the auditory stimuli or whether it's something distinctive. And that was also an issue we had with our frontal, as we weren't sure we would be able to say something separate. And because kids also have smaller heads, the regions are closer together. I know it sounds like a silly reason, but it's actually true. The smaller the head, the harder it is to sort of have this special resolution. But I think it's a really good question. And I think with FNES, the good thing is it's a very fast developing technology, and the spatial resolution becomes even better and better and better. And hopefully soon we'll be able to answer things like that.
So we will all stay tuned and follow you on Twitter to know the next results from your study. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We can move to our final speaker for this session.